Started and okay, welcome. Hi, my name is Whitley Dassinger and I work with the Blue and Gray Education Society. And today I'm having the privilege of interviewing historian and author Robert Dunkerly, who is the author of the book that we will be discussing today, which is An Explorer's Guide to America's Revolutionary War. This is absolutely wonderful if you are a Revolutionary War historian or just someone who wants to learn more about our nation's foundation of the United States of America. So it goes over battlefields and places and people, and it's just such a valuable resource. So before we begin, Mr. Dunkley, is there anything that you would like to do to introduce yourself?
Well, thank you for talking to me tonight. I've worked at several different historic sites, including several Revolutionary War sites, and I appreciate your comments about the book. I'm proud of it. I think it does a lot, and it will hopefully get people interested and excited and ready for the 250th.
Perfect. Absolutely. Yeah, let's get started. Um, So the first question is, what inspired you to write an explorer's guide to America's Revolutionary War?
I love to travel and visit museums whenever I travel. Um, my vacations are to historic sites, even though I work in history every day. Uh, and so I love to explore and find new things. And that really drove me to do this. And several years earlier, Blue and Gray wrote a really good Civil War guide. And this was an idea that we talked about with the leadership of Blue and Gray. So I I circled back to that idea with the Blue and Gray leadership a couple of years ago, and we decided to go ahead and do it. And I'm so glad we did.
Wonderful. Yeah, that's so great. Just being inspired from past books, and I'm so wonderful that it worked out and you were inspired. What a great inspiration. Our next question is, in your opinion, what are some of the most underrated or overlooked Revolutionary War sites in the United States?
And there's a lot, but I'll just highlight a couple things. South Carolina has a lot of sites that are tied to the Civil War. South Carolina had a really unique experience. The population was very divided. So you had some people fighting for independence and some people fighting as loyalists against the British. And there's a lot of small battlefields and historic sites that are tied to that really bitter and unique type of warfare in South Carolina. Another area that I'll mention is New Jersey, which saw a lot of action. Central New Jersey saw a lot of campsites and skirmishes and maneuvering by the big armies of the British and the Americans. And a lot of people know New Jersey is pretty urban and developed, but there are still things to see and find. And that was a lot of fun to research those.
Absolutely. Yeah. Two states I would not have thought of, and absolutely amazing point to bring up. Yeah. Next question is, what are some common misconceptions people have about the Revolutionary War?
Sure. One thing that I've noticed is a lot of people, they don't think about this or study it every day, but a lot of people think that the United States declared independence, and that was it. That the war had happened, and we declared independence. But declaring independence was at the start of the conflict, and then several years will follow of the revolution.
Mhm.
But aside from that, it was much more complicated than we think of today. You had, of course, the British and the Americans,
Mhm.
but there are loyalists. There are people here who oppose the revolution. They want to stay part of the British Empire. So in places like South Carolina, uh, the population is divided. It's very much a civil war. A lot of people know that there were Hessians, German troops involved. Their story is really interesting, and again, it's complicated. Uh, more than we think of today. There were six different German states that sent troops. They
Okay.
weren't all from Hesse.
Hmm.
The Spanish and the French were involved to different degrees. Canadians were involved. There was action in the Caribbean, Florida, uh, Alabama, Mississippi, modern places that we don't often think of. So it's really fun to dig into those stories and learn how big and expansive all this was.
Absolutely. That those are a lot of places and countries that I just would not have thought of. And so yeah, that's a really, really wonderful point to make and to show and uh, really great. Yeah. The next question would be for someone new to Revolutionary War history, what are three top must visit sites?
That's hard. You're going to hold me to three, but I'll do it. Um, there are a lot to choose from, but I will pick three. I would say Colonial Williamsburg in Virginia. It's a big historic site. It's got a lot of different buildings and things to see. You could spend a day or several days there.
Hmm.
But what Williamsburg offers is they show the life for daily people, shopkeepers, farmers, enslaved people. Um, they talk about the revolutionary movement, how people experience that in their everyday lives. It's a chance to see a whole village that's been restored, and it's really immersive and it's really a great experience. Another site that I'll highlight is Morristown, New Jersey, which was a campsite for Washington's army. And it's not as famous as Valley Forge,
Hmm.
but in many ways it was a more challenging campsite. The army was there during the winter, and they got something like 20 different snowstorms. The rivers froze solid that winter. It was bitter cold,
Hmm.
and there were days when the troops literally had nothing to eat. We have accounts that talk about that. And just seeing the experience that these men had and how they persevered is really, really fascinating.
Yeah.
And I'll mention a battlefield because I love battlefields. Cowpens in South Carolina is a really fascinating battle. It's small, and it's small enough that you can easily walk around and understand it. It's not big and complicated. But at the beginning of the battle, the American troops were standing out in the open as the British are advancing, and the Americans are supposed to fire on them, fall back, and reform.
Hmm.
And it just took tremendous courage. And it's a really incredible place to go and to stand there and think about that.
Absolutely. Well, those are three places I will definitely try to go to in the future and come back with a different mindset. Absolutely. Um, the next question is, were there any locations that had a particularly strong emotional impact on you?
Sure, there were several.
Yeah.
Just a few that I'll highlight.
Hmm.
In New York City, the British captured New York City, and for several years they occupy it, and they capture hundreds of American troops, and they hold them as prisoners. And what they decided to do was put them on ships in the harbor because they couldn't escape. It was an easy place to corral them, but the conditions were horrible, and many, many died. And the remains were just tossed overboard. And in the years after the revolution, bones would wash up on the shore. And they were gathered, and a monument was dedicated. And these remains were placed there with this monument on Long Island. And it's called the Prison Ship Martyrs Monument. And it's a really powerful place to visit and think about the suffering and the experience of those soldiers, thousands of them who perished under those conditions. Another site that is really powerful is maybe something unexpected, but Indiana has a Revolutionary War site that was very important. Vincennes. And to attack this British fort, the American troops had to, uh, this is in the wintertime, and they had to cross icy rivers and endure the bitter cold. And in some places, they had to cross through water very deep. Uh, and I just can't imagine that experience of crossing those rivers to attack this British fort, which they do, and they capture it. But a really powerful story of courage and determination right there.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, I cannot imagine what it must have been like in those conditions or having to be in those temperatures and for people to have endured that or people that didn't that perished. You mentioned thousands. You know, a lot of times when people think of American Revolutionary War, that's not the first thing that they think about is those conditions. And so, yeah, that's a very impactful and meaningful two places that you brought up for sure.
Yeah.
Um, yes. What do you hope readers take away from this book?
One of the things that I wanted to emphasize was the complexity of the conflict. And we already touched a little bit on that. You had a divided population in certain places. The Carolinas had
Mhm.
a lot of loyalists in places like New Jersey and New York. So in some of those places, the population is fighting among themselves. The involvement of foreign nations, the French get involved. A lot of people know that.
Mhm.
The Spanish get involved. The Spanish really are just trying to get even with England. They don't really care about the Americans. But that leads to fighting in the former Spanish and French colonies in places like along the Gulf Coast, Florida,
Mhm.
uh, Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana, the Mississippi Valley. There's things that happen way out there, very far from the East Coast and places like Boston and Philadelphia. Uh, the other thing that I think is interesting is the war is very different in different places.
Mhm.
From New England to the Mid Atlantic to the South to the frontier, like Kentucky and Tennessee. The war is different in each region, different people, geography, weather conditions, the events are different. So, depending on where you live or where you want to go and explore, you will find different types of historic sites and different stories.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting to point out. When you mentioned specifically the Gulf Coast, that's not where my mind first goes when I think of the American Revolutionary War. And I found it very fascinating that you mentioned it's different in so many different regions, and that's still reflected today. So very interesting. Yeah, that's a very good takeaway. Um, What's the best way for people to stay engaged with Revolutionary War history beyond visiting sites?
Sure, you can probably do a lot of things right where you live.
Hmm.
For those of us who live on the East Coast, it is a little easier because there's revolutionary history all around us.
Hmm.
Uh, there are, of course, historic sites to visit. There are groups like Revolutionary War roundtables or local historical societies. And those are everywhere. Historical groups that you can join or check them out, see what kind of things they do.
Hmm.
Uh, but also, almost every state now has a Revolutionary War 250th Commission. Every state is planning events for the 250th anniversary. So even if you live in the Midwest or on the West Coast or something like that, and you think, well, I'm not near Revolutionary War sites, all these states are going to be planning commemorations, and they're all going to be talking about their importance in American history. So there's a lot of things you can do, even if you don't live near a lot of these historic sites.
Yeah, that's a great point. I don't live near a lot of those sites. So, what a great way for me to get more involved and look into this more. Absolutely. That's a good point. I didn't know every state was getting involved, and so yeah, I'll
Yeah.
definitely keep an eye out for what my state's doing. So for sure, for sure. Um, uh, yes. How do you think this commemoration differs from previous major anniversaries, such as the bicentennial in 1976?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the bicentennial because a lot of people who are old enough will remember that, or a lot of people will at least be familiar with it. It was a big deal. The bicentennial occurred at a time during the Cold War when the United States and the Soviet Union were at odds with each other, and the overriding theme of the bicentennial was this strong national America, standing up for freedom in the world. And I think now we're looking at history a little more closely, and we're seeing that there are other perspectives. I mentioned loyalists and people who did oppose the revolution, and so what you're going to see now with special events and commemorations and exhibits and things for the 250th is looking at those other voices that maybe weren't being recognized in the past, other perspectives, and looking at how each group experienced the revolution. So, loyalists, uh, which wasn't really talked about before, the role of women, African Americans, Native Americans. That was touched on in the past, but I think you'll see more of that now.
Yeah,
And again, looking at how the revolution was a much more complicated event. It took a long time. It was a long time coming, and how it unfolded. I think we're going to look in more depth at all of those things.
absolutely. I really like how you brought up how it was perceived for the bicentennial and what that moment in history, what that meant for so many people in celebrating and what it means now. It's definitely just really shows how different perspectives have changed and different viewpoints and just how we've progressed as a nation. Yeah, that's really interesting. So,
Yeah,
I wasn't alive back then, so my first thought wasn't, oh, Cold War, and so how that's being perceived then and now. It's really interesting. So, really great points. Yeah. Um, what do you hope people take away from the 250th anniversary?
a couple things.
Hmm.
Um, Already talked a little bit about how it is a more complicated story than we often think it is. And that's true of every historical event. When you get below the surface, it's always more complicated. And I think more interesting to really understand what was going on, what people were thinking, and the decisions they had to make. Um, I hope people are inspired by the 250th to get out and visit historic sites. Um, to me, that's the best way to learn is to be there, see it for yourself. And I hope people are inspired to support history and historic preservation by going to historic sites. That's obviously helpful, but go a step further, join a historical society. If you're interested, get into reenacting. Groups are always looking for new members.
Hmm.
Volunteer. Uh, get involved in any way that suits you and is interesting to you, because we can all play a role in preserving the past.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm so fortunate to be a part of an organization that works towards that. And I've definitely learned so much. And even just like right now, just interviewing, I'm already learning so much. And so it's really good. And I definitely agree that being there is just a whole different experience. It's the best way to understand. And so yeah, without a doubt, I agree. Um, Next one is how can people get involved in celebrating and learning about the revolution during this time?
I would say buy the guidebook.
Hmm.
We do have a lot of resources in there, websites, recommended books. Check those things out.
Hmm.
Um, go on a blue and gray tour.
Absolutely.
But seriously, there's historical societies everywhere.
Hmm.
Even if you don't live near a Revolutionary War site, you can get involved in local history. Every state has a 250th commission. Check their website, see what they're doing. They're hosting special events, and see how you can get involved that way.
Absolutely. My apologies. I believe I repeated that question.
That's okay.
Yeah. But thank you. It was more to offer for that second answer. How important is battlefield and historic site preservation in keeping the memory of the revolution alive?
I think it's vitally important.
Hmm.
I think it's absolutely critical. To me, there's nothing more inspiring than standing at a place where something important happened.
Hmm.
To be able to be at the site, to walk the ground, you can connect with the people of the past, and furthermore, you can understand what they were thinking, what they were seeing, what they were experiencing. There's just nothing like it. And I'll just throw out a couple of thoughts to prove that point.
Hmm.
Uh, a lot of people know that there were battles around New York City during the Revolution.
Hmm.
They're all gone. They're all built over. New York grew and is a big city now, and you can't really experience some of those Revolutionary War sites. There are markers and a few things to see, but they're surrounded by the modern city.
Yeah.
Um, Charleston, South Carolina, again, a large revolutionary action there, and most of that battlefield is built over.
Hmm.
Same thing at Savannah, Georgia.
Hmm.
So there are a few places that are lost, and yes, we can still preserve a little bit here and there, but you'll never have a whole battlefield where you can really experience it to the level that you can at a place like Cowpens or Yorktown, where the
Hmm.
whole battlefield is preserved as a historic site. So I think that really is very powerful.
Absolutely. It most definitely is. And like you said, the cities have so much of what they've become now, so modern. It's built over it. I'll never forget a few years ago, I was able to go to Boston and I was so excited. And I remember I wanted to go to because I found this as a marker. It was the birthplace of Benjamin Franklin. And I was so excited. And when I got there, I couldn't find it at first because all I was looking at was a Dunkin' Donuts. And then I remember going inside and there was a plaque, and I was like, okay, so that was such a good point. I remember I was like, wow, what an interesting way of viewing it
Yeah,
now, and just how we've, like you said, just modernized and continue to grow, particularly New York. So yeah, I definitely understand that.
yeah, yeah.
So our final question, what makes the Revolutionary Guidebook unique from similar ones?
So I mentioned I love to travel and visit historic sites. So I thought a lot about what would be useful. I
Mhm.
have a lot of guidebooks. Tell I'm a book person here, and I thought about what was helpful in other guidebooks that I've used, things that I liked, things that I thought were helpful. And in discussing this with the leadership of Blue and Gray, we talked about things we wanted to include. So some of the things that I'm really proud of, we have um, a timeline in each chapter or section. So, for example, in New England, we list all the events that happened in New England. So, just at a glance, you can see how things fit together. What order things happen. We have recommended readings.
Mhm.
Uh, we recommend some of the really good books that are out there. That if you go to a place and you want to learn more about it, here's how to dig into it. Same with websites. We have a lot of recommended websites to learn more. We have some really good maps, I think, and everyone likes to explore in different ways. But we've included things like bike tours.
Mm.
driving tours, walking trails and hikes, walking tours in some of the urban areas like New York and Boston. So we really made an effort to include those things that are helpful and make this guidebook, I think, really unique and user friendly.
Mhm. Absolutely. What a wonderful way to make traveling so accessible and so many different options. That was one of the things I mentioned. I was like, this book is perfect if you're a Revolutionary War historian or just someone who's, hey, I want to learn a little bit more. I don't really know that much, and there's so many different ways to get involved. And yeah, absolutely, that's a really good point. So I definitely agree. Um, well, Mr. Dunkley, thank you so much again for having this interview and just getting to hear your thoughts and your answers about this wonderful book. But before we leave, where can people follow your work and where is the best place to buy the book?
Well, I am. I have a couple other books about the Revolution, and I do give talks and tours.
Mhm.
Uh, some of that is done with Blue and Gray Education, so you can check their website. I also do writings for the Emerging Revolutionary War Group. So it's Emerging Revolutionary War website. There's some other historians and tour guides on there that you can follow. But as far as getting the book, I think the easiest place, the best place, is just go to the Blue and Gray Education Society website. It's front and center right there. And you can also see all the programs that the group is offering. A lot of great guided tours and special events. And that's just the one stop shopping. Go to Blue and Gray Education Society.
Wonderful. Yeah, what a great way for viewers and people alike to go check that out. I know they'll hopefully be interested after this. And thank you so much again for meeting with me and yeah, just being a part of this interview process. Um, so I know that Jared has offered to make some editing. So I believe when I exit out, it'll stop the recording. But before we go, was there anything else that you wanted to discuss or anything of that? I can totally make an email after this, including Jared in and being like, "Hey, it's finished. All right, let's get on to editing and things like that." He was so helpful to offer that.
Yeah. No, nothing else from me. I appreciate your time and your help with this.
Yeah, yeah. And again, so sorry about the time difference. I was
Oh no, I don't know what I was thinking. I should have known better. It shouldn't be that hard. It's just an hour difference, but you're just behind us. We're first. You're next.
yeah,
I just got to remember that.
yes, yes. I live 10 minutes from Georgia and I still will
Oh, really? That's
yes.
going to be hard.
It is especially because I have friends that live in Atlanta and I'm
Yeah.
Northeast Alabama, so I'm only an outside out of Atlanta and I will all the time get times mixed up and I'm like I should be used to this by now. So again, I do apologize. So, and I greatly appreciate you just working around um, my schedule and being so flexible. I really do appreciate that. So,
Thanks for all you're doing.
yes, sir. Thank you. Yeah, I'll send an email after this, and yeah, once I click the X button, it should automatically record. So, wonderful. Yeah, I hope
Thank
you have
you.
a great rest of your evening. Yeah, thank you.
You too.